It is always a very rich and rewarding experience when I can take a brief break from the day to day demands of our struggle for freedom and human dignity and discuss the issues involved in that struggle with concerned friends of goodwill all over this nation. It is particularly a great privilege to discuss these issues with members of the academic community who are consistently writing about and dealing with the problems that we face and who have the tremendous responsibility of molding the minds of young men and women all over our country. In the preface to their book, Applied Sociology, Miller and Goldner, 1965, state, it is the historic mission of the social sciences to enable mankind to take possession of society. It follows that for Negroes who are substantially are excluded from society, this science is needed even more desperately than from any other group in the population. For social scientists, the opportunity to serve in a life giving purpose is a humanist challenge of rare distinction. Negroes, too, are eager for a rendezvous with truth and discovery. We are aware that social scientists, unlike some of their colleagues in the physical science, have been spared the grim feeling of guilt that attend the invention of nuclear weapons of destruction. Social sciences, in the main, are fortunate to be able to expurgate evil, not to invent it. If the Negro needs social science for direction and for self understanding, the white society is in even more urgent need. White America needs to understand that it is poisoned to its soul by racism, and the understanding needs to be carefully documented and consequently more difficult to reject. The present crisis arises because although it is historically imperative that our society take the next step to equality, we find ourselves psychologically and socially imprisoned. All too many white Americans are horrified not with conditions of Negro life, but with the product of these conditions, the Negro himself. White America is seeking to keep the walls of segregation substantially intact with the evolution of society, and the Negro's desperation is causing them to crumble. The white majority, unprepared and unwilling to accept radical structural change, is resisting and producing chaos while complaining that if there were no chaos, orderly change would come. Negroes want the social scientists to address the white community and tell it like it is. White America has an appalling lack of knowledge concerning the reality of Negro life. One reason some advances were made in the South during the past decade was the discovery by Northern whites of the brutal facts of Southern segregated life. It was the Negroes who educated the nation by dramatizing the evils through the nonviolent protests. The social scientists played little or no role in disclosing the truth. The Negro Action Movement, with raw courage, did it virtually alone. When the majority of the country could not live with the extremes of brutality they witnessed, political remedies were intact and customs were altered. These partial advances were, however, limited principally to the South, and progress did not automatically spread throughout the nation. There was also little depth to the change. White America stopped murder, but that is not the same thing as ordaining brotherhood, nor is it ending of lynch rule the same thing as inaugural justice. After some years of Negro white unity and partial successes, white America shifted gears and went into reverse. Negroes alive with hope and enthusiasm ran into sharply stiffed white resistance at all levels, and bitter tensions broke out in sporadic episodes of violence. New lines of hostility were drawn and the era of good feeling disappeared. The decade of 1955 to 1965, with its constructive elements, misled us. Everyone, activists and social scientists, underestimated the amount of violence and rage Negroes were suppressing and the amount of bigotry the white majority was disguising. Science should have been employed more fully to warn us that the Negro, after 350 years of handicaps mirrored in an intricate network of contemporary barriers, could not be ushered into equality. equality by tentative and superficial changes. Mass nonviolent protests, a social invention of Negroes, were effective in Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma, enforcing national legislation which served to change Negro life sufficiently to curb explosions. But when changes were confined to the South alone, the North, in the absence of change, began to seethe. The freedom of movement did not adapt to its tactics to difference in unique northern urban conditions. It failed to see that nonviolent marches in the South were forms of rebellion. When Negroes took over the streets and shops, Southern society shook to its roots. Negroes could contain their rage when they found the means to force relative radical change in their environment. In the North, on the other hand, street demonstrations were not even a mild expression of militancy. The turmoil of cities absorbed demonstrations as merely transitory drama that is ordinary in city life. Without a more effective tactic for upsetting the status quo, the power structure could maintain its intransities and hostility. Into the vacuum of inaction, violence, and riots flowed, a new period opened. Urban riots must now be recognized as durable social phenomena. They may be deplored, but they are there and should be understood. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections. The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or to retain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They are a distorted from a social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived Negro to take hold of consumer goods with the ease the white man does by using his purse. Often the Negro does not even want what he takes. He wants the experience of taking. But most of all, alienated from society and knowing that these society cherishes property over people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights. There are thus elements of emotional catharsis in the violent act. It is also noteworthy that the amount of physical harm done to white people other than the police is infinitesimal, and in Detroit, whites and Negroes looted in unity. A profound judgment of today's riots was expressed by Victor Hugo a century ago. He said, "If a soul is left in darkness, sin will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness." The policymakers of white society have caused the darkness. They have created discrimination. They structured slums and they perpetuated unemployment, ignorance, and poverty. It is incontestable and deplorable that the Negroes have committed crimes. But they are derivative crimes that are born of the greater crimes of the white society. When we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also demand that the white man abide by the laws in the ghetto. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He frequently violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of laws, and he violates laws on equal employment and education and the provisions for civic services. The slums are the handiwork of a vicious system of the white society. Negroes live in them, but do not make them any more than a prisoner makes a prison. Let us say boldly that if the total violations of the law by the white man in the slums were over the years were calculated and compared with the laws breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man. These are often difficult things to say, but I have to come to see more and more that it is necessary to utter the truth in order to deal with the great problems that we face in our society. The unemployment of Negro youth ranges up to 40% in some slums. The riots are almost entirely youth events. The age range of participants is from 13 to 25. What hypocrisy is it to talk of saving new generations, to make it the generation of hope, while co-signing in the unemployment and provoking it to violent alternatives? When our nations were bankrupt in the 1930s, we created an agency to provide jobs to all that existing level of skill. That are overwhelming affluence today, what excuse is there for not setting up a national agency for full employment immediately? The other program which would give reality to hope and opportunity would be the demolition of the slums to be replaced by decent housing built by residents of the ghettos. These programs are not only eminently sound and vitally needed, but they have the support of an overwhelming majority of the nation, white and Negro. The Harris poll on August 21, 1967 disclosed that an astounding 69% of the country supports a works program to provide employment to all, and equal astonishing 65% approve a program to tear down the slums. There is a program and there is a heavy majority support for it. Yet the administration and Congress tinker with the trivial proposals to limit costs to an extravagant gamble with disaster. The president has lamented that he cannot persuade Congress. He can, if the will is there, go to the people, mobilize the people's support, and thereby substantially increase his power to persuade Congress. Our most urgent task is to find the tactics that we move the government, no matter how determined it is to resist. I believe we will have to find the militant middle between riots on the one hand and weak, intimate supplication for justice on the other hand. The middle ground, I believe, is civil disobedience. It can be aggressive, but non-violent. It can dislocate, but not destroy. The specific planning will take some study and analysis to avoid mistakes of the past when it was employed onto small a scale and sustained too briefly. Civil disobedience can restore Negro-white unity. There have been some very important sane white voices, even during the most desperate moments of the riots. One reason is that the urban crisis intersects the Negro crisis in the city. Many white decision makers may care little about saving Negroes, but they must care about saving their cities. The vast majority of production is created in cities. Most white Americans live in them. The suburbs to which they flee cannot exist detached from cities. Hence, powerful white elements have goals that merge with others. Now, there are many roles for social scientists in meeting these problems. Kenneth Clark has said that Negroes are moved by a suicidal instinct in riots, and Negroes know there is a tragic truth in this observation. Social scientists should have disclosed the suicidal instinct that governs the administration and Congress in their total failure to respond constructively. What other areas are there for social scientists to assist the civil rights movement? There are many, but I would like to suggest three because they have an urgent quality. Social sciences may be able to search out some answers to the problem of Negro leadership. Fraser, 1957, in his profound work, Black Bourgeoisie, laid painfully bare the tendency of the upwardly mobile Negro to separate from his community, divorce himself from responsibility to it, while failing to gain acceptance in the white community. There has been significant improvement from the days of Fraser's research, but anyone knowledgeable about Negro life knows its middle class is not yet bearing its weight. Every riot has carried strong overtone of hostility of lower class Negroes toward the affluent Negroes and vice versa. No contemporary study of scientific depth has totally studied this problem. Social science should be able to suggest mechanisms to create a wholesome black unity and a sense of peoplehood while the process of integration proceeds. As one example of this gap in research, there are no studies, to my knowledge, to explain adequately the absence of Negro trade union leadership. 85% of Negroes are working people. Some 2 million are in trade unions, but in 50 years we have produced only one national leader, a Philip Randolph. Discrimination explains a great deal, but not everything. The picture is so dark, even a few rays of light may signal a useful direction. In the past 2 decades, Negroes have expended more effort in the quest of the franchise than they have in any other campaigns combined. Demonstrations, sit-ins, and marches, though more spectacular, are dwarfed by the enormous numbers of man-hours expended to register. Millions, particularly in the South, Negro organizations from extreme militant to conservative persuasion, Negro leaders who would not even talk to each other, all have been agreed on the key importance of voting. Stokely Carmichael said, Black power means the vote, and Roy Wilkins, while some black power means black death, also energetically sought the power of the ballot. Stokely Carmichael said, Black power means the vote, and Roy Wilkins, while saying black power means black death, also energetically sought the power of the ballot. A recent major work by the social scientists Matthew and Prothero can conclude that the concrete benefits to be derived from the franchise under conditions that have prevailed in the South have often been exaggerated, that voting is not the key that will unlock the door to racial equality because the concrete measurable payoffs from Negroes voting in the South will not be revolutionary. Wilson, 1965, supports this view, arguing because of the structure of American politics as well as the nature of the Negro community, Negro politics will accomplish only limited objectives. If their conclusions can be supported, then the major efforts Negroes have invested in the past 20 years have been in the wrong direction. And the major pillar of their people is the major pillar of their hope is a pillar of sand. My own instinct is their views are essentially erroneous, but they must be seriously examined. The need for a penetrating, massive scientific study of this subject cannot be overstated. Lipset, 1959 and 1957, asserted that a limitation in focus in political sociology has resulted in a failure of much contemporary research to consider a number of significant theoretical questions. The time is short for social sciences to illuminate this critical, important era. If the main thrust of Negro efforts have been and remains substantially irrelevant, we may be facing an agonizing crisis of tactical theory. The third area for study concerns a sociological and ideological change in the Negroes. It is fashionable not to be pessimistic. Undeniably, the freedom movement has encountered setbacks. Yet I still believe there are significant aspects of progress Negroes today are experiencing in an inner transformation that is liberating them from ideological dependency on the white majority. What has penetrated substantially all strata of Negro life is the revolutionary idea that the philosophy and morals of the dominant white society are not holy or sacred, but in all too many respects are degenerate and profane. Negroes have been oppressed for centuries, not merely by bonds of economic and political servitude. The worst aspect of their oppression was their inability to question and defy the fundamental prospects of the larger society. Negroes have been loathed in the past to hurl any fundamental challenges because they were coerced and conditioned into thinking within the context of the dominant white ideology. This is changing, and new radical trends are appearing in Negro thought. I used radical in its broad sense to refer to reading into roots. 10 years of struggles have been sensitized and opened the Negroes' eyes to reaching. For the first time in their history, Negroes have become aware of the deeper causes for the crudity and the cruelty that the governed white society responses to their needs. They discovered that their plight was not a consequence of superficial prejudice, but ways systematic. The slashing blows of backlash and frontlash have hurt the Negro, but they have also awakened him and revealed the nature of oppressor. To lose illusions is to gain truth. Negroes have grown wiser and more mature in their hearing, more clearly. those who are raising fundamental questions about our society, whether the critics be Negro or white, when this process of awareness, independence, crystallize, every rebuke, every invasion become hammer blows on the wedge that splits the Negro from the larger society. Social science is needed to explain where this development is going to take us. Are we moving away, not from integration, but from the society which made it a problem in the first place? How deep, at what rate of speed is the process occurring? These are some vital questions to be answered if we are to have a clear sense of direction. We know we have not found the answer to all forms of social change. We know, however, that we did find some answers. We have achieved and we are confident. We also know we are confronted with far greater complexities and we have not yet discovered all the theory we need. And may I say together, we must solve the problems right here in America. As I have said time and time again, Negroes still have faith in America. Black people still have faith in a dream that we will all live together as brothers in this country of plenty one day. Thus, it may well be that our world is in a dire need for a new organization, the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. Men and women should be as maladjusted as the prophet Amos, who in the midst of his injustice of his day could cry out in the words that echoed across the century, "Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Or as maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who in the midst of his vacillations finally came down to see that this nation could not survive half slave and half free. Or as maladjusted as Thomas Jefferson, who in the midst of an age of amazingly adjusted to slavery could starch across the pages of history, words lifted to cosmic proportions. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And through such creative maladjustments, we may be able to emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man into the bright, glittering daybreak of freedom and justice. I have not lost hope. I must confess that these have been very difficult days for me personally. And this have been difficult days for every civil rights leader, for every lover of justice and peace. They have been days of frustration, days we could not quite see where we were going, and when we were often felt that our works were in vain. Days when we were tempted to end up in the valley of despair. But in spite of this, I still have faith in the future. And my politics will continue to be a politic of hope. Our goal is freedom. And I somehow still believe that in spite of all the so-called white backlash, we are going to get there. Because however untrue it is to its destiny, the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny as people is tied up with the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson scratched across the pages of history the great words that I just quoted, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king. They built the home of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. And yet, out of the bottomless vitality, they continue to grow and develop. If the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the opposition that we now face will surely fail. We shall win our freedom because both the sacred heritage of our nation and the internal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And so I can still sing, although many have stopped singing it. We shall overcome, we shall overcome, we shall overcome because the arch of moral The arch of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. The truth crushed to earth with the truth crushed to earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future, and so with this faith, we will be able to hew out the mountain of despair, a stone of hope. We will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. This will be a great day. It will not be the day of the white man. It will not be the day of the black man. It will be the day of a man